Welcome back to Runabout Revival. In this episode, watch as we complete not one but two bespoke nerve centers within our machine. First, the main hub in the cabin, but also the new frunk fuse block and relay station. This journey to redesign the electrical portion of this project thus far has been a meticulous dance between wires and imagination, and today we finally bring it all to fruition. This frontward thinking design not only streamlines the electrical system, but also enhances serviceability. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. This is Runabout Revival. Well, hey, it's a weekend again. Let's get started. I'll bring you up to speed on a couple of things I've been working on. First of all, you may notice that all the wiring hanging off my garage up there, all the looms I was making, are no longer up there. It's because they're actually back here, and they're now in order from longest all the way back and around here to the shortest of each flying lead. This shortest one here is actually the boost solenoid because it's actually directly above where the hole is that goes into the cabin. So it's actually plenty of slack there. That's going to be a very short cable when I'm done with it. The last cable I still need to make is going to be the injector cables. And the reason that I haven't made these yet is they share a single power wire. I was waiting for my butt connectors here and shrink hose just to make that a little easier to construct those. So I have don't have to run 4 separate wires for power. Just going to use one power wire and then split it 4 times at the end so they can connect. I think it's all pin 2. I'll correct that on the screen if I'm wrong. Pin 2 of each of the 4 injector connectors is power. And then the other 4 for pin 1 are the signal that go into the AEM. Speaking of that, this is why the laptop's out here. I've gone ahead and finished my wiring guide for the most part. It's going to show across the top here, is this sensor harness being used? Currently I have it selected for yes, just because there are a couple that I'm no longer using. The loom part, the alternator set here, is separate. However, the other ones I split up just like the normal engine harnesses. So there'd be parts that break off at different parts, starting with A being the longest, with the AEM wideband that wraps all the way around the engine and then goes back up to where the wideband is on the downpipe, as well as the side mount intercooler fan, and then the shortest one being, as I showed, the boost solenoid. So it's letter A through, I think, G or something, I forget. But going across the top, we have what part of the loom, the description, like what is it, the engine connector diagram identifier from Toyota, what is the actual physical description of the connector, what does it look like, the number of wires going to that connector, the OEM wire colors, the new wire colors, because I didn't have all of the color with a stripe, so I did the best to match it as I could, and where it connects via the OEM system, and then notes that also describe where it connects on the new system. And I've done that for every single one of the sensor leads across the board here. And then there's a couple aftermarket ones like here that didn't have it originally, like cam and crank hall sensors, the EGT sensor, the boost solenoid, the engine cooling fans, etc. Have those all outlined here, as well as you can see over here in the notes which pins they go. That's so I can start wiring the car. As you may have seen before, this was the plan for the original setup. And again, this is why I do these things in cardboard. Originally, I was going to put all of the solenoids in the back, behind the driver's seat in the cabin. However, I was thinking about it, the engine lid fans and the side mount intercooler relay, because they're both going to be manually switched from the ashtray switch pod, I'm going to go ahead and move the solenoids to the front of the car. That way I just have a power wire going back to the actual fan on both of those. And I'm using, for the engine shroud, I'm using the MR2 Heaven supplied wiring that I'm modifying. So since I'm not going to need all the fuses here in the cabin, and this takes up a lot of space, taking that out and replacing it with a smaller one. You can see it's a much smaller setup, same company. I only need a couple things fused in the back, and because I am going to be connecting the battery direct from the new stereo head unit, the side mount intercooler fan, the engine shroud fans. I'm trying to think if there was something else. I actually got a second one that I'm going to mount in the frunk. Some of the fused stuff is going to come off the second one right next to the battery, and then the other stuff is going to be fused right here in the trunk. So it's going to give you a little more room to work with up here, just to make this fitting easier. And again, because as we've seen here, let me grab my piece, as the floor in there is slightly sloped on one end, it actually goes pretty shallow on the left side where my hand is, and then it slopes down Just for reference again, this cardboard piece is the total height that we have inside the cabin area. I wanted to make sure that the AEM piece here has that really tall connector that comes off of the top of it, and then the wires come out this direction. I want to make sure that cleared underneath the engine lid with this limited height that we had to deal with. So I've actually opted to mount the AEM underneath the plastic, and again, this is the back of the panel, so it's actually upside down, but this fits right over the AEM, and then there's the marked bolt holes that hold it up to the bottom of this plastic plate. So it's going to give me a little bit more clearance to lower that wiring harness on the AEM side, and I'm actually going to be going up. Originally I was going to use this size for a riser underneath here to make room to mount the relays underneath and then run the wires up through the board. But since I'm lowering the AEM, it's going to allow me to raise this plate slightly, and it's going to give me a little bit more room. So I might actually have enough room to mount the main relay and the starter relay under as well, and the new riser here. And this is a little rough cut on the top because as you're cutting it, it kind of melts back together, but it's 1.75 inches tall, so it's going to give me a little additional height on the bottom here to mount things underneath, more solenoids underneath. And again, I'm not going to have to mount as many in the back now because some of them are going to be moving to the front, so it just gives me a little bit more space to work with, so it'll be a little cleaner install. I'm about to cut this spot out, and if you can see here, I haven't showed you this, but on the back this material is actually textured, so this will be the top side. The AEM will poke out up here, close up to the top, so that wiring harness comes off the top, gives it plenty of room to clearance through underneath the fuse box, which will probably be here. And then the main relay here, and the starter relay, and the 3 or 4 other relays that I have, I think it's 3 now, will be mounted underneath this panel here on the bottom, using this riser to give it some space underneath. I'm going to split this up. In fact, this is just for measuring. I might actually use carbon tubes that I'll screw. Put them here, put a hole here, screw down into the dowel, and then glue those into the bottom, and then unscrew this, lift this off, and it'll leave me those carbon dowels sticking up where I can mount this plate down to, and just screw the screws back in the top to secure it. So that's how I'm going to mount this plate inside the cabin. So a lot of planning went into that, and to finishing up the pinouts for everything, changing a lot of stuff. I also added, as I may have mentioned already, a flex fuel sensor. Well, here it is. So this is the recessed EMS system, my fuse block, the ground cable right here. Underneath, we have the main relay, the fuel pump relay, ignition relay, and on the bottom there, the starter relay. The 2 yellow wires that come off, one goes to the fuel pump, one goes to the power for the PRP ignition. The 2 red lines on the bottom there go to 2 different pins, pin 63 and 68 of the AEM EMS. The blue line on the bottom there with the zip tie on it, that goes to pin 47. That's ground from the main relay. This red line coming off the starter on the bottom here, that plugs into the body harness, and that's the ignition coming from the key to trigger the starter. So that's all there. Just a little bit messy still on the bottom because those wires are not connected to anything yet. There's this hole drilled in the top here. That's where the power line is going to come in from the bottom and plug in right here. I did have to leave one of the bolts out because actually I got 3 the right size and then 1 that was too long. I didn't realize it till I got home. So I'm going to go get it the right size bolt tomorrow. And then I also accidentally, this screw was a little bit longer than I need it to be for the main relay. So I pierced the deck there, but not like anything's going to rub there. And I might just put a little rubber sticky over the top, call it a day. Plenty of room up here for my AEM pins to come out and then go into the engine bay. As we remember here, the reason I recessed it is because this left side here, the floor comes up a bit. If we look at the bottom here, it's very thin here. I know there's a shadow there, it's hard to see. And then the relays and the main relay and the starter relays and stuff are a little bit thicker on this end. So with the height here, we'll have plenty of room for the tall AEM harness to come off. And because we've recessed the EMS down beneath the board, we have plenty of room to fit that in there. So as you see, it came out pretty clean. Next part is going to be mounting. I'll show you this. This is the sorry my handwriting is horrible. My dad was a left-handed doctor, so I had no chance at developing good handwriting. Here you go. This is the model based off of the AEM diagrams at the end of the Infinity manual. If I might flash them up here on the screen. I used a 2JZ GTE from the Toyota Supra. It's basically a 6-cylinder version of this engine with a couple changes, but the power side is going to be pretty much identical, so this is what I use for that. And then these are the spacers, as you remember, to fit the main relay and the starter relay and the universal relays underneath the board. I bumped up the height a little bit to 1.75 inches. To make that happen, I got these spacers here and a bolt and then this metal pin that goes in between. So when you close these down, they are exactly 45 millimeters, which is pretty close to 1.75 inches. So this will be like this on the bottom with the pin. This will actually be glued onto the floor inside the cabin behind the driver's seat. And then this part will be bolted under here. There'll be a bolt hole with a screw going through the top, threaded into the top here. And then this will slide onto the top of this. See if I can do this one hand through the camera lens. Boom. And that gives me my space, 1.75 inches, and keeps this thing kind of floating off the bottom. That's going to do the trick, I think, to mount it. I haven't decided if I'm going to use 4 of these or 6 of these, but somewhere between 4 and 6. So that's the next step, is to actually mount this in the back, connect the couple wires, figure out how I'm going to run those up to the pin for the AEM. I might run them around and then up with the rest of them coming in from the engine bay. Haven't decided that yet. And then I got to put a connector on this to go to the body harness. It's been many episodes ago, but you'll remember that harness that we created for the body harness that dead ends into that cabin. We're going to create the other half of that connector now that's going to plug into that. I believe there's 10 inputs, 9 more after this one. One of them is also a sender for the fuel pump, I believe. So 8, I'm not counting those. And most of those come out of the engine bay. Next, I'm going to mount this inside the cabin, and then we'll start pinning the AEM connector that plugs into there, and the last couple for the body harness. Then we should be good. I'm going to rotate this here. So you'll see down in there, I put the rubber grommet in that goes into the cabin. You can't really tell, but just to the right of that, where this line comes out, that used to be, I believe, the latch that we've now run through the frame here. I'll turn around. I believe it was this cable here that we now run through the frame behind to tuck it. But that used to run out, I believe, of that hole. Instead, this is actually the power lines that just tucked back here for now for the engine lid fans from MR2 Heaven that came with the shroud. It has an inline fuse, 30 amp, I believe. There is the MR2 Heaven fan relay harness. That's the alternator and the body harness running through the grommet right now. All of the cables will come back from the engine and run underneath this. And this cabin here, this is where the ABS plastic's going to be with the AEM EMS, and a fuse block on this side with the relays underneath it. That's where the old sub used to be. Carpet's a little janky right now just because, you know, it's loose, but it actually looks good when it's in place. So that's there. The power cable for the fan shroud is going to run up front where the battery is, and then that's where the other small new fuse box is going up there. And that's where we're going to connect the power supply for the head unit in the dash, as well as the cooling fans, both for the side mount intercooler and the engine cooling shroud, which is, again, there's the engine cooling shroud in carbon fiber. And then, of course, the switches for both of those fans are right here in the ashtray with the little blue LED on top matching the interior color. So I'll put those in as well. Okay, well, I just finished the frunk fuse box and relay station. So I'm going to show you that here. I got my pile of wires here that I'm going to pass through from the frunk into the cabin. A lot of these are going to be connected in the ashtray area. For example, these 3 wires here are power, red, white is neutral, and then the 2 blue and the green one there. Those are the 2 switches coming off of the relays. Actually, they go underneath. I was able to use those same spacers I used for mounting the rear plate to give it some room underneath here so I could pass the wires underneath the relay station, since they're all going to come out on this side essentially. I have my positive battery cable here, my negative battery cable here. These are waterproof relays. They're a little bit beefier than the ones I use in the rear cabin, but mainly just because they have this additional waterproofing on the bottom there. Since they're going to be somewhat exposed to the elements, I wanted to make sure to protect them as much as possible. So this red wire here is going to be the power wire from this relay. This blue wire here is going to be the power to the device from this relay. That goes to, those 2 wires will go to the fans. One is the 25 amp one is going to be the side mount intercooler, and the 30 amp one is going to be the engine lid cooler. Yellow wire is actually power for the stereo head unit, the Alpine, since it needs a direct battery connection. And then this orange wire here, 16 gauge, that is actually the 10 amp permanent power for the AEM ECU, and that's going to run all the way to the rear cabin, so it's a little bit longer. So that's built. just need to mount this plate in the front where the battery is, pass all these wires here through the firewall into the cabin. So that's gonna be real fun. So that's the next for the wiring stuff, and we'll go from there.